Welcome to the Naavik Gaming Podcast, where it is our mission to explore the business and future of video games. We bring together the industry's brightest builders, investors, and thinkers to keep a pulse on current events, dissect emerging trends in games, share lessons learned, and have a great time. This podcast is also part of Naavik's growing ecosystem, which ranges from free and premium research to consulting and advisory services. For more information, visit www.naavik.co. This episode is brought to you by Neon. For the first time in our industry, developers can finally have their own D2C channels to save on App Store fees and build closer relationships with players. But there's a catch. Selling direct means either building complex infrastructure yourself or choosing among legacy providers whose inexperience in games or questionable reputations pose real risk to your business. Luckily, there's Neon, the D2C platform built for games. As a merchant of record with customizable web shops optimized for conversion and modern APIs that let you use your existing LiveOps tools, Neon is trusted by some of the biggest names in gaming to help you sell direct without the typical overhead. To start selling direct and finally take control over your full player experience, simply head to neonpay.com or check out the link in the show notes. And with that, let's jump into the episode.
Hello, and welcome to the Naavik Gaming Podcast. I'm your host, Niko Vuori. Today, we have a great episode for you. We are talking to one of the earliest and biggest believers, builders, and investors in Web3, and that is Animoca Brands. Animoca has been an unwavering Web3 cheerleader since day one, with a stated goal of leveraging blockchain technologies to deliver digital property rights to consumers around the world and to help establish the open metaverse. The company develops and publishes a broad portfolio of both original and licensed IP and has its finger in about as many Web3 pies as anyone on the planet through its over 450 investments in some big names like Yuga Labs, Axie Infinity, Consensus, Magic Eden, OpenSea, Yield Guild Games, and so many more. And today, we have a great guest, Will Griffiths. He is a general manager at Animoca. I'll let him speak to his background once we're done with the intro, but suffice to say, he's also an extremely experienced veteran of the gaming space with over 2 decades of hard time served, including an association with one of my favorite game developers, Codemasters, the creators of arguably the greatest motor racing game of all time, Micro Machines. Sadly, he doesn't have any insights. We just discussed that earlier on. But a wonderful, wonderful title nonetheless. He now runs the Rev ecosystem, REVV, at Animoca, which is the hub for Web3 motorsports games. That's right, listeners. Today's episode is all about the Motoverse. Will, welcome to the pod.
Hey, so good to be here. And I've been listening for a long time, genuinely. So it sort of feels, I'm slightly starstruck. Yeah, in person.
Well, I always tell guests who've actually ever been on the pod that it all goes downhill from here. This is the pinnacle. This is the pinnacle. No, I'm kidding. So let's get right into the episode. Well, we always start with the background on our guests, especially ones with such amazing careers such as yours. Tell us more about who you are and your journey into Web3 and Animoca.
Yeah, sure. So how did I start? So I had a lot of interest in how things work. So I did an engineering degree, and then I moved from there into IT consulting, which is pretty boring, and then worked as an ethical hacker, which is a bit more interesting. And then I started. I noticed the App Store had turned into a thing, and so I made some apps. So an app where you throw your phone in the air and it captures the way the phone moves and then spins an avatar around on your phone. So I got in the room with Apple and started having conversations with them about that and realized that this was something that I can perhaps make a living from doing, making games. So then I went to work for Natural Motion, a video games company that ended up getting bought by Zynga. And then I moved from the UK to Australia and worked for this sort of for family reasons and ended up working for casinos, online casinos. So I got this sort of blend of casinos and all of the insights from the user experience design of that and crypto and security technology and games. And then we moved back from Australia to the UK and I joined Codemasters and headed up their live service division. So how do we monetize the Codemasters titles after the point of launch, which is super interesting. So like, rolling out analytics, doing all that good stuff. And then after I'd been there for a couple of years, we ended up getting bought by Electronic Arts, who I'm sure you're familiar with, which was an interesting experience. Yeah, for sure. So, we used to make the Formula One game and the rally game and a bunch of others. And then we transitioned into EA, and I joined the EA strategic growth team. So I was working with them on things like the Motoverse and how they think about the future of sport and NFTs and, all this kind of stuff, because they think about that kind of thing all the time. But it was kind of weird because I was in Oxford in the UK, and everybody that I was working with was in California exclusively in
Redwood Shores.
HQ.
Redwood Shores, right next door to where I am, actually.
Really, it's probably I could see out the window. It was. There's such a fascinating group of people. It's really, really cool. We came up with a lot of different concepts and ideas, but after a while, I kind of decided that I wasn't probably ready to move to California. So I looked for something a bit more, with at least a more diverse selection of time zones. And that's how I came to meet Robbie Young, who's the CEO of investment at Animoca, and he had this sort of collection of. I often refer to it as a Lego collection. So he had this Rev token. They bought 3 different racing studios: Grease Monkey Games in Melbourne, Eden Games in Leon, and We Play Media based in Phoenix, Arizona. That are all making racing games. Either their own IP or MotoGP and all this kind of stuff. And they were looking, and they'd had some success with some Web3 games, and they were looking to do something. And they were like, "There's something here. We need someone to make sense of it." And that's what I've been doing for the last 2 years.
Fantastic. And we're going to get right into what you do specifically around the Motorverse. But I want to talk a little bit more broadly about Animoca Brands. You just touched on it briefly there. And even listeners who don't follow Web3 as closely as you and I do know the name Animoca Brands, have likely heard of it, and know it's a big deal. And yet, there isn't that much known necessarily about exactly what Animoca is doing, because it's doing so much. I think that's really the key here. So why don't you tell us a little bit about Animoca, the kind of overall strategy, how it got into Web3, and what's been going on over the past few years?
Yeah, sure. It's a pretty unusual place, and it's pretty kind of weird and wonderful. The match, it sort of mirrors the Web3 world. But so Yat Sui, our founder, you may well have seen him do various talks. He's done a few TED Talks. He's out on the kind of conference track a lot. And he was running Animoca as I think it was called something else. Maybe it's called Outplay Studios, as a mobile game studio back in 2011. And they had many different games. I think they had 4 or 5 maybe of the top 10 games on one of the App Store charts at that time. So they were doing really well. And then they had this experience where I think Google or Apple banned some of their apps. And he realized in that moment that he didn't really have this control over his business that he thought, because he was relying on these third-party publishers. And I think that was a very formative moment for him. He was like, wow, these guys have got quite a lot of control over what we're doing. And so then when CryptoKitties in 2017 came around and the GameFi kind of movement started to kick off, that was something that just made perfect sense for him to get into. And so that's when he started investing. Him and his team started investing in things like Axie Infinity and the Sandbox, and that's like the beginning of the whole thing. And obviously, the story of the growth of crypto, the different bull runs and all that. But this company is, I really like the way that Yat thinks about it. So it's not a it's really very wholesome. It's this understanding that this technology can actually empower people and bring fairness back to the world. And that's what we are trying to do in lots of different ways. So his goal really is to accelerate that process and the adoption of Web3. And they're achieving that by investing in loads of different companies and projects and ideas and teams. And they're really serious about it. So we've got, I think, over 500 different things that we're invested in, either wholly owned or majority owned or partially owned, or there's a small investment or advisors across the portfolio. and it's just like it's a very wide, attack, like increasing the probability that we're going to find product market fit. So we have, music brands, fashion brands. There's a lot of games, but there's also, where you kind of picks and shovels, and there's probably things that there's probably categories that I don't even know about. And the way it manifests is we use a lot of different ways of communicating, obviously Telegram and WhatsApp and email. Also, we have this giant Slack instance in the middle, and all of these different projects are able to share their learnings and their knowledge and collaborate in a way that I genuinely believe is, massively accelerating the way the kind of pace that we can find how Web3 fits the mass market. And that's what we're doing in Motoverse, trying to hit the mass market.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we're going to get into that in just a second. But I did want to touch on kind of the broader approach, because it is a really interesting, really fascinating, lots of shots on goal. Obviously, you're fortunate to have the resources to be able to make all those investments and to have all of those, attempts on goal. But really fascinating approach with, your own IP, licensed IP, your own studios, publishing relationships, et cetera. And of course, all the investments. Okay, before we get onto the Motoverse, which we're going to get onto next, just high level, what are some of the biggest Animoca games that our listeners should check out if they're interested in just poking around a little bit to see what Animoca's up to?
I'm totally going to shill my own games here, but there are others. So we have Talk Drift 2. Is a AAA drifting racing game in Unreal Engine 5, sort of photorealistic graphics. It's in early access on Epic Game Store. It's already had over 400,000 downloads. It's made by the studio in Melbourne. The guys who are making it are actual real life drifters. So they, at the weekend, they stop working on their computers and then they get in their cars and drive to the tracks and go drifting. So that's really cool, and made with a lot of you can see the passion of the development team in the game when you play it. And then Cosmic Royale is a game that's currently in closed beta, but you can get access to it via something called the Motoverse, which is one of the projects of Animoca. So you can visit the motoverse.xyz and claim your Mocha ID, which is sort of like the precursor to being a member of the community. And then that means you can visit the Cosmic Royale website. And Cosmic Royale is like a blend of Mario Kart and Fall Guys. So instead of racing around the track 3 times, it's a point-to-point race with a bunch of obstacles, and there's 40 people at the same time, and there's 3 rounds with different tracks. So you basically people get knocked out, and then there's a winner at the end. And we're getting a lot of Web3 players playing that and loving it, but we also will launch that on the Epic Store as well in Q4, and that will have hopefully hundreds of thousands of Web2 players adjacent to these Web. We can talk a bit more about that maybe later on. But that's exciting. And then there's Life Beyond, which is being built by a studio in France, which is not live yet, but super excited about it. It's a big kind of space opera game. But then we also have puzzle games. So we recently did a collaboration. I'm going to forget the name of the famous chess player for this game called AniChess.
Magnus Carlsen.
That's right.
Norwegian guy? Yeah, okay.
Yeah. And then we have a Bomberman style game called Cosmic Bomber that's also in closed beta that's getting a lot of traction, built by one of our studios in America called Enway. There's loads of things going on, for sure.
A lot of stuff happening. All right. Well, we're going to have not links to everything in the show notes, but we'll have links to maybe 2 or 3 of the top ones. So we'll make sure we get those figured out. Okay. So let's move. Obviously, Animoca Brands, as you've described, is a very large operation with, finger in a lot of pies, like I mentioned in the intro. And so we can't talk about all of it. And so we're going to move on to your baby, which is the Motorverse. So what is the Motorverse? And what are your aspirations for it? You've mentioned a couple of titles already, but talk more broadly, not so much about the individual titles, but what's the vision for the Motorverse? What do you expect it to become, hope for it to become over time?
So this is Lego set of bits. And for me, we spent a couple of years, because we had a bunch of different things live already, whether they're Web 2 games or Web 3 games, so bringing everything together, thinking about what works long term. And for me, it's about having this tool set of games design mechanics and things, now we've got cloud computing, we've got streaming and all these things. Now you can roll out that tool set a bit more, and you've got, your Web3 tool sets. So you've got tradability, interoperability, things like that. We think that the best value add that we can do in this space is to do the central licensing of vehicles. So working with automotive brands to publish cars, a bit like when they make real cars in the real world, and then people buy those cars and they can work in multiple games, and a growing list of games gets added to that roster. So as a user, basically, you're buying a car, but now there's a buy button. Now there's a sell button next to the buy button. Mm-hmm. And there's like when you're in a game, if you want to go to another game, there's a button that says like, take my car to another game. So these are the things that we think are better than what's out there right now. And we went through a lot of different ideas, but this is the one that's easiest to get across. And I think it leverages Web3 technology. It just makes sense. So you're able to have this relationship with a car like you would in the real world. So like if you buy a car, we were talking before about commuting, right? There's a relationship that you develop with your car. There's a story you tell, you go places with it, you experience different things in and around it. You got music and all this kind of stuff. That is enhanced, obviously, if you're into racing, you take your car to the track and you race it around, this kind of thing. We're looking to replicate that experience, but online. So we want people to have, this affinity with cars, so they're not in a walled garden. They don't have to buy a game to experience a particular car or grind through hours of gameplay to get a car, and then for it to only work in those games. We want to sell it centrally. And we've got a mixture of different tools that enable us, the person in a really unique position to do that. Because we have 3 different game studios, we can work on the data standard that's needed to define a car. So we've worked with multiple car brands and motorsports and our own studios that have experience, obviously, in making car games in different engines with different handling models to create this sort of kernel of what defines a car. And now we can also prove out the model of, all the incentives. Like, why would a brand get involved? Why would a game studio get involved? And why would a user get involved? We can kind of do that in a sandbox. And then we can bring other people in once we've worked out all the incentive structures.
No, finish your thought, please.
Well, so we're finding that, one of the things we observed was that a lot of these car brands have released collections of NFTs, and then they don't sell out, or maybe they make a bit of money, but it doesn't. There's not enough demand in the market, and there's no utility afterwards. So everyone who buys one complains. And so by bringing all of this together in one place, we can concentrate the demand for the assets and also have utility at the point of launch in our games and have growing utility. So this solves the concerns of the vehicle brands. And they love it because they get these it's a new way of owning one of their cars, right? So it's previously, if you might have to spend $100,000 to buy a car. Now you can spend much less and be part of their kind of engagement strategy. And then the video game studios love it because the deals we're doing mean that if they build against our standard, they get access to those licenses. So there's a bit of quality control needed, of course, but this is one of the biggest challenges that small studios have setting out. So they make these amazing driving games, but they can't use real life cars. And those real life cars are like the stars of the show. Those are like the Bored Apes, you know what I mean, in the car world. So we get the game studios also get user acquisition, because if we have 100,000 holders of cars and I release the game, and then all of those holders get a notification that says, hey, your car now works in a new game. Come and try it out. And we know these people like racing games and cars already, so we're expecting a high level of conversion.
Yeah, so you touched on a lot of what I was going to ask you as well.
Sorry.
But no, that was great because you're preempting some of the stuff. So our listeners will be very well primed as we get into these next questions. But one of the questions I was going to ask you, because one of the talking points that we have here are the terms that you and your team have used, is digital vehicle culture, which was fascinating to me. I think I know, and I think I understand where you're getting with that. But where my mind went immediately when I read that and saw that, I was like, oh, that's like Nike and Adidas. It's your sneakerheads who are very engaged in the real world. They're collecting all their pairs of shoes. And Nike and Adidas, I think those two in particular have done a really excellent job of converting real life ownership, real life sneakerheaddom. I don't know if that's a word, but I've just made it up, into a digital affinity as well, right? And they've experimented a lot. It's not just the NFTs, but it's also just kind of a digital connection. It's a digital community. So I am very curious to hear, what are your thoughts on what do you think digital vehicle culture means? Where does it actually take you long term? Obviously, cars are way more expensive than shoes are, even though you can spend a lot of money on a golden pair of Donald Trump sneakers NFT collection if you wanted to. But nonetheless, if you're going to own a car, buy a car, the price points are very different. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on how do you think that digital vehicle culture concept translates from where my mind immediately goes, which is the sneaker head culture.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's quite a lot here. So we have a lot of ideas, obviously. We're on a bit of a journey. So our first interoperable car will be coming out in the next few months. In fact, we just announced a partnership. We'll talk about that later. But it's the right way to think about it. So you'll know that even in like 10 years ago, if you're looking at a car game on a current gen console, it's photorealistic. Mm-hmm. Right? So you're kind of breaking down this barrier very easily. Like, I could just be someone who loves cars. Maybe I'm not even a gamer. And there is now a desirable item for me that I can own and have online, right? And the other thing we've done is we did this big bit of research into the market, and we found that there's about 1 billion people who self-identify either as racing gamers or motorsports fans around the world, or petrol heads. Okay. So this is sort of army of people that freaking love cars and bikes and tinkering around with them and talking about them, and and we've also spent time at things like Goodwood, if you know what that is, like the Festivals of Speed in the UK. And
yeah. I'm a motor fan, by the way. I'm a petrol head. I like my cars. I just went electric though, having owned a 4-liter V8 for the longest time, naturally aspirated. But I went electric recently. But yeah, I love cars, and I do all the research, and I know all the stats and all that. So you're talking to your kind here.
Great. Well, that makes this easy. So with Goodwood, we love Goodwood, and we kind of think about them a little bit as the in real life version of what it is that we're trying to achieve. So if anyone's listening who's not into Goodwood, it's just celebration of motorsport and fast cars and old cars and new cars and bikes, and they drive them all around and do drifting and race, and there's a really kind of cool vibe at this old stately home in the UK. And you can really, it sort of comes alive. There's that everyone's interested in everyone else's vehicle. And so that for me is like a perfect place to start a Web3 community, because there's a lot of people who are like super like-minded. Everyone's saying hi to each other, and so we think of ourselves as setting out to create this community around these assets. But it's a little more than that, because there's a lot of different conversations going on with different games companies, but also car brands. So some of the car brands we talk about, digital twins. So if you buy a car in real life, maybe one of the optional extras is to have the same car minted for you for use in games, and vice versa. Like, maybe, like, we've had crazy conversation. I mean, this is not a deal that's been done yet. Like, if you own a digital car, like, maybe you get like a massive discount at a dealership, or there's some sort of in real life event you can attend at the racetrack for racing teams and stuff. So it blurs the lines of, the real world and the gaming world and the collectibles world. But I think if done correctly, it's very easy to understand. You come in, it's like, this is a beautiful car. I recognize it. I love it. How do I get my hands on it and have some fun with it, and then go tell a story with it?
Yeah. No, I love the vision, and I think this is one of the closest that Web3 gets to that kind of physical digital divide because there is such a pre-existing fandom for this. Like, I'm about to ask you a question about interoperability, and one of the biggest criticism, even though I'm a believer in Web3, like one of the biggest criticisms I have about interoperability is the fact that, like, if I have a sword in World of Warcraft, like it doesn't make any, even if I could take that sword into another game, it doesn't make any sense. Like, it's just not that interesting, you know? It's a tool, it's a means to an end. It's not actually the end in and of itself. Whereas with something like sneakers and cars, as we're talking about, those are a means to an end. Like, that's the end itself. Like, if I own a beautiful car and I'm going to go show it at Goodwood, like, I'm not taking my sword in World of Warcraft, showing it off to people, you know? So I think that's what's interesting about this. And I think you with the Motorverse and the car digital physical divide is a perfect use case. But I bring it back to interoperability here because that's still, to me, you've mentioned it already, the term, it still to me is, can I really take my digital Lamborghini, and we're going to talk about Lamborghini in a second, later on in this episode, can I really take my digital Lamborghini from, one game to another, and it will work the same? I know you talked about building with standards, but that to me is the biggest challenge, I think, with Web3. The promise is interoperability, but in practice, it's so difficult because you have to, you have to, the art styles don't work, and the game engines don't work with each other, and the stats aren't the same, and all that stuff, right? So there's just a lot of challenge, I think, to this interoperability piece, which in theory is great, but in practice is very challenging. So I want to hear how you guys are thinking about that. How do you solve that problem of, yes, I could use this in 2 games now or 3 games, but I still can't take my digital Lamborghini on any track. Like, I can't go to Goodwood and Nürburgring and, Singapore, night track for the Formula One and take my car there because it just doesn't work the same way. Long question, but really getting at a core point here.
Yeah, no, it's a good one. So I don't have an answer for the World of Warcraft thing. I think that when I think about that type of interoperability, I think about that game, and I think that there's tons of different weapons, and they're all carefully balanced, and there's a big constellation that means that you can there's a choice and a playoff that works in that world, right? And as soon as you take something out of that, and then you walk over here with it and try and use it in another game, it makes sense. Maybe it's the most powerful weapon in the game, where it's completely pointless. And just every time you do it, there's a balancing challenge. I'd love to see it solved, but I don't have an answer in my head to it. But I think cars are different, and it's because they have real world stats, right?
Interesting.
So you know, they're not designed like that. There's like, this is this car model, and it's just, unfortunately, it's faster than your car, so it's going to win in this race. Or this is just the handling of this one is particularly good on this type of surface with this kind of setup, right? So there is a provable state in the real world that is the reference point. And that's what, brands care about that too. They want their cars to perform relative to other brands in games. It's not just the users, because they want everyone to know they've got the best car, right? And so as long as we're faithful to the metadata from the real world, when we recreate the cars in the games, it seems to me to be fine. There are obviously different types of games. We have a karting game. So if you're to take a high performance car and put in a karting game, you're not going to get a high performance car. You'll have a cosmetic car that looks like that. Otherwise it kind of ruins the game, right? But that's what users' expectations are too. If you're playing Talk Drift 2 and you have a Lamborghini, then you would expect it to behave in a certain way, and be fast on the straights and handle differently around corners to the other cars. And that, to me, is the kind of gold standard. And then you apply that from the kind of sim side of racing through the kind of arcade style of racing through to, the more casual style, which would be a cosmetic change.
Yeah.
So that's how I think about that.
Yeah. What's the natural end state for that? Is there kind of an idealized future where you see, obviously you see Animoca and the Motoverse at the heart of it, but what's the natural end state? I mean, obviously we're not going to the car manufacturers are not going to stop licensing their cars to other game developers, right? Whether they're Web 2 or Web 3 or whatever. So curious to hear your thoughts on what is, if everything goes to plan with the Motorverse, let's put it that way. If everything goes to plan with the Motorverse and your vision of this interoperable future comes to pass, what does it look like? What does that future look like?
The challenge that people, I think, often associate with things like interoperability is like, how are you going to get from A to B? So like, I think long term, it's the forecourt of the internet, whether it's us or maybe there's another project that does it, but that's what our vision is. So if you're a car manufacturer and you're thinking, hey, we're going to launch this new model, like, hey, we better call the Motoverse because we're going to publish, we've got to publish the car digitally as well. Okay, that's where I want to get to. But then in the process for getting there is about just aligning everyone's needs and wants and incentives. So for the car brands, they'll be launching small sets and collections of cars and experimenting with demand. And as we grow, we should get more and more people in the Motoverse and generate more demand. It's interesting for the car brands too, because you might think that the conversion to the assets would be, the overall sales might go down because they might be cannibalized. So this is something that we're really interested in testing, but we believe that the conversion will be much higher because the asset is not a one-way purchase, right? So when you think about like buying something in a free-to-play game, it's basically you just spend the money and it's gone, and then you got to the next level of Candy Crush. Right. But this is something where because there's a sell button next to the buy button, that it's an easier decision and perhaps more meaningful. So we're hoping that more people purchase. And then as new games join, we were motivated to join and increase this ecosystem. More and more players come in and become more aware about the concept of interoperability, and like it starts to become like table stakes or whatever you want, like people are like, hey, this is cool. Hey, and then they start approaching some of the bigger car game companies and say, hey, why can't I use my X in your game? And hopefully eventually then they end up adopting the standard as well. It doesn't break the Web 2 model because that continues. So you can still sell Web 2 cars. It's just that the Web 3 cars or the cars, the interoperable cars, are more interesting for a user. So it's like a deeper level of engagement. You can take it between different experiences and tell a bit of a story with it.
Yeah, I mean that is a very powerful vision, and it is probably the best of what Web3 has to offer right now. In terms, sorry, I phrased that wrong. Web3 offers the best path for this particular category, I think, compared to so many other games and genres that have talked about interoperability and digital ownership and it making sense across different games, but not actually in practice. So very interested to see this. You talked about this earlier, but just the incentives for other developers, it's user acquisition, it's the access to a larger community of fellow petrol heads and digital ownership fans. It's the licenses that they would otherwise have to negotiate themselves. Are you already seeing that happening? Are you seeing developers outside of your own Animoca Brands ecosystem coming to you and saying, "Hey, this is really cool. Like, I want to be a part of this"?
Genuinely, yeah. I mean, we haven't got anyone over the line yet, but we've got maybe 20 or 30 different conversations happening with different games, because there's a lot of games that get somewhere where they have something that's awesome and there's just this little bit that's missing, and that's often something that they're looking for funding for, so licensing or marketing. And so these are the things that we can offer in return. The other benefit that's not included in that list for game studios is what we're experimenting with at the moment when we do our first few minutes is understanding the usage of the assets. So like the reasons that people purchase the assets, like what game they bought it for in the first place, or if that was, someone bought an asset and they immediately go and play this game, and we thought about coming up with a model for our internal studios to assign revenue generated by the sale of the cars to the studios. It's quite complex. to do without understanding the behavior of users. So instead, this is one of the benefits that we have because we've got these in-house studios. We can do this test where we're covering the integration of these models into the individual games centrally, and then we can sell the assets and watch where everyone goes and what they do with them. And then we're going to start basically creating a sort of affiliate model. So from your Web 2 game, you can send people to the central forecourt to buy assets which are interoperable. And then, if you want, you can create your own store. In your game, maybe you get more if you do a direct sale. But then we can sort of further incentivize people from the different game studios to try and sell down on the assets that we've published. And I like that model because it basically means more people. We're going to get really good at selling cars quickly because everyone involved is trying their own way of doing it.
Yeah, it really does open up a lot of opportunities. But as you mentioned, it could get wildly complex. And the very first thought that came into my mind, as a longtime gamer myself, is arbitrage. If you can buy a car for cheaper in one game, or there's a sale on in somewhere, and you can transport it across. Again, I don't know the exact details of how you guys are planning on implementing all this stuff, but it gets really complicated really quickly. And as a former games PM myself, product manager, I get cold sweats just thinking about how you're going to balance that and make sure that you're not open to exploits. I don't know if that's how you're thinking about it at all, but that's what comes to my mind immediately as I think about this.
No, I definitely have that same thought process. I was a kind of security background, but I think in my experience, usually, I'm sure it's the same for you. You have these complex systems, and there's usually a very simple rule that you can apply. Once you understand the behavior of the users, you can be like, okay, everything is central and price is set centrally. If you wish to discount, you pay the difference yourself. So it's kind of then a user acquisition cost or a loss to you. So you may choose to do that at your own expense. So it could be a way of people coming into the ecosystem late, driving adoption of their game, or these kinds of things. But I think longer term, it's in my mind, it sort of turns out like sort of a Netflix for cars, right? So you come in, maybe you've got your garage at the top, and you can go in there and flick around, visit friends' garages and stuff. And then you've got this forecourt area where you can go to different showrooms and see cars, or maybe there's a live auction going on with people bidding on a car in the secondary market. And then beneath that, there's all these different types of experiences you can have. You select a vehicle, and then off you go.
Yeah, I mean, a wonderful vision. I think a lot of fun, and as a car racing, although much more on the casual side, not the hyper realistic side, myself, I can see where this can go. I know that Torque Drift is something you guys are very excited by. I have not played it, but I had a look at it. Looks beautiful. Fantastic. Unreal Engine 5. The graphics are amazing. Obviously, you've already got a lot of car manufacturers and brands integrated there. You just announced the Lamborghini partnership today. In fact, today's August 8th, at least in California. I think it's probably August 9th already in Perth. But big news there. So talk to us more about Torque Drift. You mentioned it earlier on at the start of the episode, but I want to hear more about Torque Drift and why you guys are just big believers in this game.
Well, first of all, they've got an amazing development team. So I've kind of talked about that before. So I like, I've seen lots of different types of teams, and these guys, this is what they love. They're really good at it. They're working super hard, and you get this extra level up of creativity, when you're sort of really passionate about it, and you see that reflected when they talk about it and when they release new updates. They're really ambitious in terms of their scope. So they just recreated in their latest update, still in early access, they've recreated this part of Tokyo called Daikoku, which is this area under this sort of spaghetti junction of roads, which is really famous for where they do car meets. People meet up in these fancy cars and do drifting and stuff. And they showed it to me before it was going live, and I was just playing, and I'm like, oh, this is cool. And then I realized that It's absolutely massive. It's like almost, it's sort of got kind of GTA vibes, like the size of the environment. So they're incredibly faithfully recreating these places. And there's tons of new modes coming out. But the cool kind of Web3 part of it, which we're still like working through, is that any asset in the game, all of the car assets and many of the part assets are available both as Web2 assets and Web3 assets. And we're trying to understand, because we know that we've got this mass audience of players who will come in and play the game because it's beautiful and free to play and really fun. But we want to take them and try and introduce them to the benefits of Web3. So it's not, we don't want to be like, hey, come and buy an NFT, because that's not really what it's about. It's more like kind of what I was saying before, like next to the buy button, there's a sell button. And then there's another button that says like, hey, want to take your car to another game? These kind of experiments. So we've got a lot of opportunity to try this stuff out, see what works and what resonates with players in terms of functionality, the way we talk about it, price. Obviously, there's gas fees and extra cost of making NFT and integrating into other games. So, but we've got some like different approaches in the different games as to achieve that goal, really, of taking this large audience of people and introducing them to Web3. And so that's what we're doing in Torchlight 2. And then in Cosmic Royale, it's slightly different. So we are creating themed collections of carts. So Cosmic Royale is this game that's like a mixture of Mario Kart and Fall Guys. And we're creating collections based on PFP collections and Web3 IP inside the game. So there's currently, like, if you own a Mocha, which is one of the PFP collection from Motoverse, when you come into the game, you see your character there rendered in 3D. So what is, currently a two-dimensional PFP image pops into 3D and they're driving a cart around. And we want to replicate that with lots of different collections. So we're talking to loads. I mean, I don't think I can list them out, but lots and lots of different coins and collections to create exclusive content. So that drives their community into this game, and there'll be battle between different communities. Maybe we theme tracks around different collections. But then it goes out onto the Epic store. So then you have a few 100,000, hopefully, free-to-play users come into the game, and they're driving their carts, and they like look over and they see this Web3 IP, and they're like, what the heck is that? And so then you sort of go down that rabbit hole and find this Web3 world via this game. So yeah, those are the two big games that we have currently in early access or beta, and we're thinking about how we reach that market.
Cross-pollination, really, or testing ideas in both directions, Web 2 to Web 3, Web 3 to Web 2. Just to, throw you the thing that I'm sure you've heard many times before, and certainly in recent times, is the idea of bringing a big audience in Web 2 into Web 3, and I know you said you're not going to do it as bluntly as like, here's an NFT, go and buy it, right? That's not what we're talking about here at all, and I know that. However, there has been a lot of backlash, just like there was with free-to-play gaming, free-to-play mobile back in the day. Like, yes, there's a strong analogy there. But it seems to me that the backlash from Web 2 players, when they're introduced to Web 3 elements, especially if not done elegantly, let's put it that way, has been much more potent than the backlash from kind of traditional gamers when free-to-play was first introduced and the mobile app store was first launched. So I'm curious to hear, because you have so many games in this space, you probably have a better view of this than almost anybody else, any other Web3 developer on the planet. I'd love to hear your thoughts, not just to Torque Drift and your other more recent titles, but the overall ecosystem. Is it a viable approach to take Web 2 gamers, introduce them to Web 3 elements, and hope, I suppose, even that they will adopt?
I think it. Okay, so I'm not going to pretend there's no backlash, because there is, right? There definitely is. Even on Talk 2, there's been people coming in and saying, hey, what's with the NFTs kind of thing. I mean, I've worked in a few different industries, making tech products. I also in the middle, I worked on a fintech app in crypto, which I didn't mention, but there's I'm a big believer in product market fit. So you need to offer something to somebody that's better than what's there now, or that helps them solve a problem they didn't know they had. And I think just telling somebody that they can buy an NFT is not solving a problem for anyone. And so that's been done quite a few times. And there've also been, very, very expensive NFTs, or NFTs that, someone sold and then they never got anything and all this stuff. So then that's associated this technology with like bad vibes. But I genuinely think that if done correctly, it can be better than what people have now. I tested this because we recently moved from the UK to Australia. So when I was in UK, we got kids, and I would go to the pub with the other dads every day. No, every day.
I was going to say, escape the kids month. Every day. Yeah, I'd be there every day.
Every month or so. And I would talk to them about it. And they, none of them are video games developers. So I would test out sort of, one-liner picture. Oh, what do you do? And I would be, do this. And say, basically we're making this thing where you can buy a car once and it works in loads of different video games. And yeah, that's pretty cool. Yeah. So that's the way to Web2 users. I think you need to offer them something that's better than what they have now. There is a branding problem with NFTs, but the underlying technology is pretty irrelevant to most people. I mean, I think there's like two categories of strategy where
it's categories. It's a great game.
You've got this very financially literate group of people who are getting up to speed on Web3, and you can try and create products for them, but those products will never go, in my opinion, like really mainstream. You're not going to hit like this 1 billion Motoverse audience with that, because what they're interested in is having a good time going and watching sport and playing racing games, right? They're not interested in like taking sort of making investment choices and all this stuff and understanding how wallets work. And they don't have any reason to do that. Mm-hmm. So I just want to make their experience better.
I've thought about this quite a bit myself, and at the risk of editorializing a little bit here, when I play a game that has a kind of economic component, Web2 game, so I pay money for it. I pay my $49.99 or whatever. I buy the game, and I put a lot of time into it, and I see the value of whether it's a player in a basketball league or a car that I'm leveling up, or a level 100, sorceress or whatever. I want that asset in that game to be static. Like if I drop the game for a week and I come back, I don't want the value of that digital asset to have drastically changed. It's a little discombobulating because I'm going there to actually enjoy myself. So one of my theses that I've been noodling on, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on it, and we can cut this entire segment out if it doesn't make any sense. But one of the things I've been noodling about is that value fluctuation that Web3 offers, especially with the NFT ownership and kind of a tokenized economy, is that actually the opposite of what gamers are looking for? Not all gamers, but is that not the opposite of what the majority of gamers are actually looking for when they're seeking out a game and choosing to spend their time in that for entertainment value and not for financial speculation? It's not super well formulated, that question, but I'm really curious to hear your thoughts on that, because that is a big component of what Web3 is trying to do. They are offering essentially this, and even what you're talking about with the Motoverse. I own this car, I have a sell button next to it, but the value of it's going to fluctuate depending on what's going on with the ecosystem. And maybe that's just a step too far for gamers that are looking for entertainment. Anyway, your thoughts on that?
Yeah. No, I think the last thing that I want to do is to expose people to the market. You know what I mean? That's not the goal. I think that, volatility. Some people love that, right? There's plenty of people getting
Traders.
stuck into that, but that is not what you go to a video game for.
Exactly.
But I think you're in our case, if we think about your car, right? In the real world, like your car, the value of your car does change over time. It
generally goes down.
There was it does go down slowly, because your wear and tear or whatever. But some cars, the value goes up.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think that there's some really interesting stories that you can tell with cars. And this idea of artificial scarcity that is created in video games. You use it in loads of games, right? Anyway, like before Web3, but like also now, I'm more of one of the things we talk about a lot is artificial scarcity versus genuine rarity, right? So like you have, we're going to make 100 cars and then we'll pay loads of money for them, or we'll just have an open mint of cars and then people can go and tell a story with their cars and customize them, and then they become unique from the very moment that you purchase it. Your name is, or your wallet ID or whatever is now attached to it. So there's like this story associated with it. And I want that to be, to create this sort of deeper market. So you need to find the right person to buy your car. You know what I mean? Yeah. So it's not like buy for 10 cents now or sell for 9 cents now. It's like, you want to say, oh, cool, let's go show it to some people and see what they think is worth. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? So it's like, it's like a step. It's like, it's not like a real time, I'm looking at the chart, sell, it's a considered decision, and maybe you talk to the person who's buying it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I buy that, and I've heard versions of that, and I've espoused versions of that myself too over the years. I think the jury's still out. I think that's the bottom line. Really, is I think the jury is still out, and I think there's just a lot of experimentation that needs to happen across the board. Web 2 developers going to Web 3, Web 3 developers going into Web 2, and seeing what works. I think you and I both will agree on this, which is shoving an NFT and like saying buy me to a Web 2 gamer is not the right approach. And I know that is 100% not what you're talking about. I know you're taking a very measured and deliberate approach, but that is generally what has been tried, and I think that's what the backlash has or some versions of that have been tried, and I think that's where the backlash comes from. So, very curious to see where that innovation comes from. Where does that little spark come from? It's 7 years since CryptoKitties, 2017, 2018, when it kind of reached kind of more mass consciousness. Obviously super early still then. Maybe 2021 is a more fair starting point for the Web3 craze with Axia, 2020, 2021. But, we're a few years in now, and we haven't yet seen that big kind of spillover into the mainstream. So.
Well, do you know where I think it's going to go? So like for me, you're right, it is a series of experiments. So we'll be pushing these things out. And then it's going to come from the players, right?
Yeah.
We're going to hear the community talking about it. Be like, hey guys, you did this. Like,
I loved it.
Guess what? That doesn't work. But actually, this is how we want to sell cars. Or no one wants to sell cars. Or everyone is all about interoperability. Or the price is wrong. Or like, you know what I mean? Like, why is this price fluctuating? Stop that from happening, please. Yes. And these are things that we can have some measure of control over. It's about getting it out. Say, here you go. Here's a car that you can buy here, and it works here and here. And if you get bored with it, you can sell it.
Yeah.
What do you think? Come and let us know how you react to that.
Yeah. No, and to be fair, I think your thesis around car ownership, I think is probably one of the strongest, if not the strongest, thesis around the physical versus digital fandom, essentially fandom of cars, that does not extend to characters in video games or swords or digital swords or things like that. So I do think that this is probably one of the best shots on this goal that there is. So I wish you all the best, because I'm a big believer in experiments and experimentation and moving the game industry in general forward, and making the same games over and over again. As much as I love Call of Duty, but Call of Duty 79 is just going to be better than Call of Duty 78. Probably not that much drastically, revolutionary or introducing new concepts. And Rightly so, by the way. Don't mess with a good thing when you've got it. Okay, so we're coming up to time here. In fact, we're over time, and I appreciate you taking a few extra minutes. But is there anything else that we've not covered today that you think we should mention?
I mean, there's a lot of things happening, but I'll make sure you've got all of the links and stuff to put in the show notes so people can go to motoverse.com and check out what's going on. We regularly update that. You should follow us on Twitter at the Motoverse. Also, we literally, as you mentioned, we just announced our relationship with Naavik, which is really exciting. Mega exciting for us. Yeah, it's been really fun working with those guys. So there's watch that space. No, I think we've covered a lot. We've definitely covered a lot. It's been really interesting for me as well. I think I learned a couple of things off you, so that's good.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. I definitely learned a lot from you, and I love guests that are pushing the boundaries, whether I believe it's going to work or not. I think yours absolutely has a very big shot. Sometimes we have guests where I'm not so sure it's going to work, but I always appreciate the audacity to try new things and try to move the space forward. So yeah, thanks so much. We do always end with a question. What 3 games are you playing at the moment, or are you most excited by? And here you cannot use your own ones. You cannot plug your own ones. Any medium, mobile, console, PC, Steam, whatever. Board games even.
So I'm playing a lot of princess match cards with my daughters at the moment. Okay. But you probably Disney, but that's probably not the one that I'm loving the most. And so I'm playing Cocoon on PlayStation 5. I really like that. I like the kind of that it's. And then the game The Witness.
Not familiar with that one actually. The Witness. I'm actually going to make note of that. I make notes of all the games that our guests bring to the show.
So the guy and I'm going to forget his name, the guy who made Braid and smashed it, then he made The Witness. And The Witness is really cool because there's no localization. So the whole game is beautiful and it's full of puzzles, and you get sort of halfway through it and you realize that you could be from anywhere in the world and still having the same experience because there's no writing in the game. And the Cocoon is made by the guys who made Limbo. You probably have heard of Cocoon, but that is sort of has a similar vibe. So it doesn't have a word written in it. It's just very intuitive. And it's actually quite fascinating because the kids will sit with me while I play it and they can solve the puzzles too. It's just this really interesting world in a world logic. I like that. And I'm also playing Alan Wake 2.
Oh, my Finnish compatriots. Yes. That's on my list actually. I played Alan Wake 1. I played the shit out of that one, actually. I'll be honest with you. I haven't played Alan Wake 2. I haven't had a chance yet. But is it scary? Is it scarier than? Is it as scary as people say?
Yeah, it is kind of scary. Yeah, it is scary. I mean, it's a different kind of scary. So the other game I was going to, and the other game. I mean, it sounds like I play a huge amount. I probably play like 3 hours a week or something. But there's Alien Isolation. I tried to play that when it came out. And I love the Alien franchise, like completely. So I'm excited about the new movie, the Alien Romulus, I think it's coming out soon. And so I played Alien Isolation when it came out, which I think was in like 2017 or something, maybe earlier. And I was too scared to play it, so I stopped playing it. And then I've recently gone back to it, and I'm trying it, and I'm like stuck somewhere on this space station. It's really quiet, and like, my wife's gone to bed, and I'm like, actually, this is pretty scary. So
I'm going to turn this
off. But they just do it was such a well-made game. It's just really cool. So those are the things I'm into at the moment, game-wise.
Fantastic. All right. Well, listen, thank you so much, Will. It's been a real pleasure and honor to have you on the show. I've learned a lot. I know our listeners will have learned a lot as well. And best of luck with everything you guys are doing, which is a lot, obviously.
Thanks. It's been great to be here. I really enjoyed it. Hope you talk again soon.
Yep. Welcome back anytime, by the way. And of course, a big thank you to all of our listeners. We'll be back next week with more interviews, more insights, and more analysis from the weird and wonderful world of Web3 and gaming. So until next time, friends, stay crypto curious and feel free to send questions, guest recommendations, and comments to me. My email is niko@naavik.co.
If you enjoyed today's episode, whether on YouTube or your favorite podcast app, make sure to like, subscribe, comment, or give a 5-star review. And if you want to reach out or provide feedback, shoot us a note at podcast@naavik.co or find us on Twitter and LinkedIn. Plus, if you want to learn more about what Naavik has to offer, make sure to check out our website, www.naavik.co. There, you can sign up for the #1 games industry newsletter, Naavik Digest, or contact us to learn about our wide-ranging consulting and advisory services. Again, that is www.naavik.co. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you in the next episode.